Welcome to Taste Buds. I'm Debra Eckerling, goal strategist, writer, and foodie. And today I'm speaking with Rachel Simon, author of Sesame, Global Recipes and Stories of an Ancient Seed, and co-founder of Seed+Mill. Welcome, Rachel.
Hi, Deborah. Nice to be here.
I'm so excited to talk to you. I'm getting a theme here. What is it with seeds?
I mean, seeds are the beginning of life. That's how everything starts. Vegetables, fruits, humans, animals, we all start. And not just animals and humans, but ideas or relationships. Everything starts with a seed. And it was just such a wonderful metaphor to write both about a book about food, but a book about life and travel and history. So it was a great place to start.
And what was the seed that got you on this path?
So my seed was sesame seeds. And my business Seed+Mill is starts with a sesame seed, and that's taken me further than I ever imagined. Yeah, I would go.
What was the seed that sparked Seed+Mill?
Like all stories that begin with small seeds, you just never know where they're gonna go and how they're gonna grow, and that is very much true for this business story. So it really started as as a shop. I moved to New York 14 years ago now, and I met a couple of women in New York who were all sort of at the second stages of their careers. I was in my late 30s. I had arrived thinking I would be in New York for 1, 2 years, and met my two co-founders, Lisa and Monica, and we all had a passion for food and travel, and we'd all lived overseas and were interested in food and cooking, and entrepreneurship, and sort of saw an opportunity to open a business all around a product, mainly tahini, that hadn't really had its moment in the sun. It was an underrated, underappreciated condiment or ingredient, and we wanted to throw our energy behind, doing something fresh with it. And little did we know that, we're nearly 10 years old, and we honestly had no idea that this little shop would just turn into a business, which would turn into a brand and eventually now a cookbook.
Wow. And as you said before, a seed can turn into anything, and you also don't always know what direction it's going to grow into.
100%. I know. Actually, this is a nice little moment. There's a poem in my cookbook that I will pull up the page. It's right at the very beginning of the page of the book, right next to the kind of dedication. And would you be open to me reading this poem, Deborah?
Yes, I would love that.
I wasn't planning to, but this is just such a beautiful moment to open this conversation, and it relates to the seed. So it says, "In the beginning, it's always a seed. The first seed planted in a garden, the first seed buried in a crack in the sidewalk, the first seed of an idea. And if the elements are right, that seed is destined to grow. How wild, how high, how fast, how fruitful is all yet to be determined. But one thing is for sure, it will grow into something."
Amazing. And it's a life thing. I mean, and as you heard in my intro, I'm also a goal strategist. I write books on goals. I am all about setting the foundation because once you've got the foundation, you can go anywhere and everywhere.
Absolutely. I love that. You got to be optimistic, and you got to give your seed as much nourishment as you possibly can, and then hope it grows into what you hope it will be.
And in your case, the seed of the shop grew into the seed of this beautiful cookbook. So, was this just a no brainer or was this something that you've been wanting to write for a while and now is the moment for this book?
I mean, there's two ways to approach that question. I love cookbooks. I always have. I've collected them my entire life. I like to cook at home, and so writing a cookbook feels like that bucket list, task that I've always wanted to do. I never imagined I would, because I didn't feel as though I had an audience or a platform or really an area of expertise that I could own and bring into the world. And I suppose that's where the opening of Cedar Mill gave me a lot of insight and inspiration behind the recipes for the book. But the book, the business is now 9 years old, and I can tell you, for 9 years, I've had pretty much the same question asked of me at our counter in New York. Everyone stands at the counter, they hold their jar of tahini, and they say to me, I bought a jar of tahini a year ago because I wanted to make my own hummus at home. But but what else do I do with it? And it's in my pantry. And is it still okay for me to use it? It's a year old. That question, I think I've been asked that question, honestly. I can't even tell you how many times. And so I would always say, well, first of all, yes, you can use your jar of tahini. It lasts a lot longer than a year, so don't worry about that. And why didn't you use it? There's so many other things to do. And they would say, like what? And so I could see there was really kind of a lot of people really needed some more guidance and inspiration about the versatility and the vastness of what else they could be doing with this single ingredient.
And did you grow up loving tahini, or was that just something that developed in working through the store?
Deborah, I haven't told that many people this, but actually I hated tahini. I grew up in Australia where it's not very easy to find it. It's not a very common condiment around the world anyway, but particularly not in Sydney, Australia. And the only tahini that I had ever tried there was bitter. It was I hated it. Um, but I just didn't realize that not all tahini and not all sesame is the same. And it's very similar to things like wine and chocolate and grapes and cocoa beans and all of those, important, let's just call them commodities. You can get good or bad, core ingredients. And so the minute I tried really good tahini made from really high quality premium sesame seeds, I was like, oh my God, this is not the same thing.
Mind blown.
Yeah. Truly. I mean, I cannot begin to imagine this time, if I take myself back, let's say 12 years, this time 12 years ago, I was a lawyer. I was sitting at a desk. I was working with my family in Sydney, Australia, and I would never in a million years have imagined that this where is where my life would end up and that my career would take me, my family would be living.
Was there a light bulb that said, "Get out and do something new," or was there a life change, or were you just like, "I've had it"?
Um, Look, I've moved a lot. It wasn't my first pick up and move. I have lived in many countries. So this is actually my fifth country where I've picked up and lived and really absorbed myself into a community or a society. But in this case, I was definitely ready for a career change. I wasn't particularly inspired or driven by the mission of what I was doing as a lawyer. And working in the food industry has a whole different set of challenges, but at least I'm where I am most happy when I'm in a kitchen, or I'm most happy when I'm cooking for somebody, or reading a cookbook, or talking with a chef, or learning about the origin story of a particular recipe or a type of cuisine. So I feel very in my sort of happiest place in this industry.
That's amazing, and I have to tell you, I think I've had maybe 5 former lawyers on the show. 1 current okay, 5 former lawyers, 2 former ballerinas, and 1 current lawyer. Where did your love of food and cooking come from?
Um, Back to the seeds. So well, my grandmother and my mum were both extraordinarily talented cooks. And in a particular way, they were not trained chef or rule book cookbook followers. They were very just throw things around, put together a meal without following a recipe. And I had a great childhood watching and observing and learning from phenomenal cooks. But they also brought something else that was really important, and it's left a very deep and profound sort of imprint on me, and that is that they were bringing to the table not just the nourishment from the food, but it was their way of nourishing their families emotionally. And they were also immigrants, and so my grandmother was Czechoslovakian, and she moved to Zimbabwe, and my mum was born in Zimbabwe, and then she moved to Australia. But with everyone in my ancestry has moved around a lot, but with each of those moves, the one constant was I'm going to bring to the table, wherever that table may be, I'm going to bring to that table a sense of history and a sense of ancestral, almost yearning to be together as a family and together over a meal. I can't even possibly describe the depth of that feeling for me, and it's almost like it was printed in my DNA before I was even born. That I was generationally meant to love and want to feed people.
And you traveled many generations also before you were born, so definitely in your DNA. What about the Jewish piece? How is that factored into your love of food and your upbringing?
I mean, so the being Jewish is very important to me, and Jews typically congregate around food and festivals and rituals. And so, whilst I wouldn't describe myself as an Orthodox Jew. I'm not in a synagogue every week. I very much love to adhere to those important rituals. So, Shabbat dinner is a very important. Friday nights are very important meals for me. I try pretty much every Friday night to either cook for my family or host friends and family or be with other people. So the food sort of marks that Jewish ritual and calendar for me. And it's also a reflection and a mirror to a lot of the Jewish people's lived experiences, which is that we've often moved from place to place, sometimes by choice, and a lot of the times because we've been thrown out of the places where we were born and been forced to migrate. And that migration has produced a lot of different ways that Jewish people can love and appreciate food. It's also why I love the Jewish food community, because it's so non-monolithic. It's so diverse, and it brings in so many different cultures and histories and geographies. And it's just an immense honor to even call myself a representative of the Jewish food world, because it is just so interesting, and I could talk about it forever.
You do the Jewish food world proud. There are a lot of foods that are typical, traditional, but tahini is one of them, right? How do you define or differentiate Jewish food or Israeli food, or is it all just food that's that warm feeling of love and community?
Well, Deborah, how long do we have here? I think we might need a part two and three episode to answer that question. That is such a complicated question. So I'll try to give you a few snippets. I don't try to define Jewish food by reference to a geography or a place. I think, I mean, obviously there's some foods that have been eaten consistently in this region or that region, but honestly, for me, and I speak as well for Cedar Mill. I don't Cedar Mill is not a Jewish business, let's say, even though I am very proudly Jewish. I don't see our products as Jewish food. It's and also tahini and halva. Then the words tahini and the word halva, they're Arabic words. They come. The history of tahini and halva derives itself from the Middle East region, what we might now call, modern day Israel, but there's plenty of other countries in the Middle East that would claim just as much love and heritage and history around tahini. So I try very hard not to claim it or own it. I don't want to be that. To me, it's just not necessary. I don't see it as a pie where we have to take slices out of a pie. At Sedum, we've been accused often of having appropriated food from another culture or stolen it from other people. And I find that argument really divisive, hateful, unnecessary. There's plenty of room for everybody to honor and celebrate the history of tahini and halva. But I would say that they come in terms of the history comes to the Middle East. And in terms of the Jewish community's love for it, I suppose, yes, lots of Jews in Israel love tahini and halva. But actually, a lot of the Jews that immigrated to the US out of Eastern Europe brought a love of halva, particularly. And so there was a lot of migration from Eastern Europe, Russia, Poland, um, even, Czechoslovakia, where my ancestors come from, that moved to New York, and they brought with them a love of halva, and they reestablished their careers even pre-Holocaust. So there's a very famous halva company in New York called Joyva, which is 120 years old now, and it's a fourth generation family owned business who've been making halva and selling it on the Lower East Side of New York to the Jewish community for generations. So yeah, again, I think we can celebrate tahini and halva as something popular within the Jewish community, but I would never say that we started a love of tahini before other cultures.
I appreciate the clarification. I feel like I stepped on a landmine, but you reined it in beautifully. I love that. And I do agree with you. We can all love food and we can all have our own personal or historical or religious connection to the food. And it doesn't mean it's just ours. It is ours.
I mean, it's the most incredible way of unifying people. We should actually be just sitting down, using the food as the vehicle to connect and to actually facilitate dialogue and nourish each other, whether we come from opposite sides of the political spectrum, or different religions. And that's also what inspired me to write the book, is that I realized, having met so many different people at our store in New York in Chelsea Market, that in the market we get about 20,000 people on average a day that come through the market. They don't all come to Seed+Mill, unfortunately, but that's a lot of people. There's a lot of people, and the volume of people that have discovered our store, they're not Jews, they're not Israelis, but they come from other places, and they love to tell us how they enjoy halva in their homes. So I have people from Afghanistan who want to say, "Oh, we eat halva on a roll-up piece of flatbread." And then I have people from India that say, "We've got 200 varieties of halva that you can buy in India." And then I have someone from Argentina who'll say, "We call this mantikol. Is that the same thing?" And everyone loves to share their origin story of what they connect about halva. And for that reason, I wanted to make the book feel very global, very international, and very embracing. I wanted the book to be an umbrella where everybody could see a part of their food identity in the book.
Oh, I love that. And I love that phrase food identity because it's it's personal, but it's very communal.
Very. Yeah, it can be both. I love that. Actually, that's a really great way of saying it. Like, we don't need to erase any part of ourselves to show up as ourselves, and yet sort of show up and then enjoy the meal with somebody else.
Even going back to the Shabbat dinner, what is it for but to bring people together? Sometimes they're Jews, sometimes they're neighbors, sometimes they're friends, sometimes they're all the above. But the joy
Yeah,
of sharing the meal is what creates community and conversation, and that's how we make the world better.
100%. In fact, actually, my husband's not Jewish, and he asks me to host Shabbat more than anyone else. I mean, there are occasions where I haven't got guests coming or a meal planned, and he'll specifically say, "What are we doing for Shabbat this week?" Like, he's not letting us miss that weekly ritual for anything.
Oh, I love that. What is a recipe that you love that we can share?
Well, one of my favorite recipes is the sesame and peach miso crumble. And I will share the recipe with all of your listeners. The reason that I love this recipe is that, one, very easy to prepare. It's made with a base of peaches, but when peaches are not in season, you can substitute with apples or other fruit. But it's essentially, just a lovely fruit forward crumble crisp. But the crispy, crumbly parts at the top are made with a very basic recipe of some sugar, flour, butter. But then I've added a twist of some sesame, some seeds, some tahini, and some miso. And the miso again represents what I want with the book, which is to feel very global. Miso is a very popular Japanese ingredient, and it adds this earthy umami sort of. It adds something to the top that's very hard to explain in words, but it's really delicious. But I think it's just such an easy, who doesn't want a fruit crumble any time of year? So that's why I love it.
Oh, do you have sentimental reasons for loving this recipe as well?
Absolutely. So I grew up my mum also hosted Shabbat every Friday, and her favorite dessert was an apple crumble. She made an apple crumble pretty much in Australia we call it crumble. I think Americans might call it a crisp or a cobbler. I'm not sure exactly if you have a slightly different word for it. But anyway, my mum made fruit apple crumble every Friday night for dinner. We often disagreed about the way she would make it, the way versus the way I would make it. But this will forever remind me of my childhood growing up in Australia.
Oh, amazing. And I think the word you're looking for is a cobbler, but it's fruit with goodies in it.
I always just say, pick your fruit. The top needs sugar, butter, flour, and then add anything else. And so I like to add nuts or spices, or I've added my tahini twist and the miso or whatever you want to add. But as long as you've got those it's almost like a triumvirate of sugar, butter, flour, and then add anything else you want. And it's what's not to love. They're all in your pantry, or presumably if you bake, it should be in your pantry, and it's easy.
Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you for your time, Rachel. Where can people learn more about you and your store and, of course, your beautiful new cookbook?
Oh, thank you, Deborah. This has been such a pleasure. So, if anyone is interested in our products, we have a store in New York's Chelsea Market. Please come by and say hello in person. And if you're not able to buy anything in person, then we have a website. It's and spelt out mill.com, or our social media at Seed and Mill, where we share lots of free recipes. And if you want the book, you can buy that at any place all your independent bookstores, Amazon, or through us at our website.
Wonderful. And what final food for thought do you want to leave people with?
That's a tough one. I often just say silly little sayings like ice cream is better than therapy, but go for an ice cream with a friend, like go out with a friend today and sit down, enjoy something delicious. You let the food be the vehicle for the human connection, not just that sort of physical nourishment. It's really about nourishing our hearts and our souls.
Oh, so well said. This has been such a joy. Thank you so much, Rachel Simons, for joining me. It goes from the seed to the conversation to a life that you love. And that's really, what seeds and what you stand for is all about.
Thank you, Deborah. And let's make a little competition for your audience. Anyone who can count the number of times we said seed, they should come by, and I will give them a free tahini ice cream at our store if they get the right number. I'm going to have to use some sort of AI to count it.
Love it. We've just made it the best game in the world. Now you've got to re-listen and count the amount of times we said seed to get your ice cream. You have to fly to New York to get it though, if you're not ready. So, little caveat. And thank you again, Rachel. And thank you for tuning in to Taste Buds with Deb. Don't miss an episode. You can subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, and or your favorite podcast platform. And if you go to jewishjournal.com/podcast, you can read the article and get the recipe for that wonderful fruit crisp from the book Sesame. Yay. And you can learn more at tastebudswithdeb.com. Until next time, enjoy some food, enjoy the love, and bon appetit.